Hell is Us is one hell of an experience, a game of magic and modern, of a world sharded out from our own, a mirror that's a complex mix of many games, almost equal to the domain spanning puzzles that occasionally grace it. A piece of cosmic horror here, a cornerstone of Legend of Zelda, and its more organic lack of guidance gameplay there, and at the center, a mix of pieces that reflect real conflicts with humanity, conflicts like Bosnia, Ukraine, parts of the Middle East, and, well, Texas, if anybody tried to attack it. Enigmatic as it may be, Hell is Us is a third person action adventure game from a Montreal based studio, in this case, Rogue Factor, and it's about to get as real as it can. Using Unreal, the game is hitting on September 4th, 2025, across PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and Windows PC. I haven't seen anything about the Switch so far. The gameplay unfolds within a semi-open world, deliberately stripped of conventional navigational aids. Think of it almost as an open hub. There's no map, compass, quest log, or objective marker. Instead, the experience leans into environmental storytelling and player intuition, compelling explorers to piece together their journey through the dialogue, observation, subtle world cues, and the growling dog-like warning of a whispering spirit or a crackling energy just over a mountaintop. This minimalistic design approach sustains a sense of discovery almost from beginning to end and places storytelling and listening to those stories at the core of players' experience. You're consistently searching around, listening, paying attention to everything that's going on around you as you're trying to find out what happened to your family in this war-torn world before you returned. And I'll tell you what, one of the things I did not expect was to open up a game and suddenly be hearing Adam Jensen talking to some dude whose face looks like Thanos' bulge. Looked like a grape, a dichotomy of facial features and weird-ass voice. Seeing this massive, almost demonic, magical being sitting across from a normal-looking character. But then, as they discuss real things going into the main character's life and how he got to this particular situation, I realized Hell is Us is gonna be one hell of a ride. Good or bad. For a game that explores this kind of lore, and I would say heavy features when it comes to its story, it actually throws you in pretty quickly. Just pieces. For example, Secret World and its supernaturalness mixed with its modern, as well as many other titles that leave it up to you to figure out exactly what's going on. Hell is Us has you peter back and forth in a Boy Scout's worst friggin' nightmare, a mysterious woods, creepy sounds kind of situation right at the start, making you listen and understand. Behind you, there's 17 different trails all going off, and none of them giving an indication of which one that you need to follow. And you listen and try to understand. Everything about the game is diegetic. The entire way in which it's played is about giving you information when it comes to you and your senses. An NPC giving you the information when it comes to a quest, or if they don't know or don't feel like giving any information to you, sometimes the absence of it. And that makes exploring and the overall mystery that much more enjoyable. For example, in the first area, as I was meandering through what looked like a haunted version of the 7-Acre Wood, I started to hear a unique sound far off, a sound that reminded me of childhood that was offset by the sound of water coming off of something metal in the distance, as well as the crunch of a living creature where I couldn't quite place exactly its location. As I moved forward, I realized that was wind chimes that somebody had hung up, and that turned out to be a particular item of interest later on. But it sort of primes you right away for understanding how the game's going to deliver its information. For me, it's one of the first games in a long time that's felt like the developers have looked at it and said, hey, let's do this. Let's just see what happens. And let's make sure that people understand that they need to pay attention to every single thing in the game. As I continued to explore, I ended up meeting some characters, understanding a little bit about the game world, and the very first discussion I had with somebody, I realized, oh crap, I need to pay attention to this. Different NPCs you talk to unlock various areas within your HUD and different clues, and as you get more information, those clues solidify into actual story leads. But let's jump into combat for a second. We'll get back to exploration in a moment. In Hell is Us, up-close combat isn't just about swinging sharp things into creepy things until all things stop moving. Well, it is, but it's a bit more nuanced than that. Every weapon, your swords, your axes, your polearms, your blunt regrets of massive hitting have their own rhythm, weight, and learning curve. Attacks feel pretty deliberate, and a couple misaligned swings can end up with the main character inspecting the floor at insanely high velocity. Later upgrades to these can add abilities to the weapons. Now, one of the reasons I like the game is there's a stamina health system that I didn't quite know how it was going to work out, but as I jumped into it, it's sort of a lovely little twist on cruelty. Stamina regenerates, but health doesn't, and the less health you have, the smaller your stamina pool because it caps. It's a slow, quiet collapse into exhaustion that pushes panic and rewards people who treat combat a bit like a chess match if the pieces were bleeding and screaming. And add to that this healing pulse system. Defeating enemies spawns little floaty orbs that circle the main character like confused space fireflies. Gather enough and you can pop up a healing pulse and pull them in. And if you don't get interrupted or hit, you heal up to the amount of damage you did to the enemy. It's not necessarily new, it's clever, it's occasionally clumsy, but it keeps you constantly managing risk versus reward like a one-man triage center, especially because it feeds into the way the game handles other aspects of combat. Add to that the ability to have a drone fairly early on to harrow your opponents by sending it out to confuse them or distract them, especially if they're in pairs, because apparently ghosts hate drones also, and it sort of builds up into a combat system that isn't necessarily insanely mechanically accurate or correct, but it does feel pretty fun. Everything's rounded out by a dodge out of the way and parry kind of system, all that feel pretty natural, exactly as you would expect in a game like this. As you continue to explore, more and more groups of enemies start to come out. You have to very much keep an eye on the game world because you can actually see a lot of indications of enemies, not just the ones that are there, but ones that will pop up if you keep an eye open. I do wish the game had better impacts when it comes to the combat. Yes, I get it. For the most part, you're fighting demons and ghosts who don't exactly have a ton of mass, and who knows how it feels to kick the shit out of a spirit. But it is weak in that way, and I would have liked to have seen more impact. Now, after a little bit of time, you actually get the ability, as I said, to upgrade your weapons with various different glyphs that you found throughout the game world. The glyphs are rage, grief, neutral, terror, and ecstasy. And each one is sort of a sin of mankind marbleized into an actual glyph that you put on the item. And you can also get defensive gear. You can have your craftsmen study to learn more systems, and honestly, it just seems to generally work. It's also here, though, where you really do see your only bit of stealth that's in the game. There's a particular glyph that you can get and put on a weapon that stops some of the enemies from seeing you. Now, there's a couple bits of genius here, though. Genius that if I don't mention, I'd feel like I was doing the game a bit of a grave disservice. The first is that the enemies don't respawn unless you leave the entire level and come back. It's sort of a soft system, too, because there were occasional times where I was traveling where one or two would respawn. But what it does is it offers a completely different style than, let's say, a Dark Souls game does. And honestly, I expected that kind of respawn system. You may think to yourself, that would undo the challenge, but it's actually far from it. What it actually does is it caused me to extend a little bit farther than normal. It caused me to explore a little bit more than I would because I knew that behind me isn't a conga line of ever resurrecting spiritual assholes where I know that every single 6 feet on my way back to base is going to be filled with enemies doing the equivalent of spiritual sit-ups, getting up and standing to attack me. Instead, I got to go around that corner. I got to go around that bend, and I can see this amazing thing far off in the distance, and that I would be able to trek back even if something farther off ended up damaging me. And that sense of exploration continues to expand out as you play. There may be issues here or there, though. I certainly do wish there was a jump button because apparently this hobbled knacker can't even get over the smallest boulder. But he rolls like a D20. But at least you don't have to worry about a bunch of enemies snicker snacking the shit out of you that were gone 30 seconds prior. There's a lot of different flavors of other games here. Stalker, sometimes in its overall field and direness and almost a feeling of loneliness, at times a bit like Elix, even when it's just the unique fiction that was presented. There's almost a little bit of Witcher 3 as well as its presentation of longer vistas and places that you look and go, you know what, I want to explore that. With this many odds and ends put together, you would think it might be a mechanics mess, ultimately far less utilitarian and more of just an ungainly mix of different mechanics and styles, but it actually came together quite well. Now, you also notice that Dark Souls isn't in the discussion here. That's correct. It solidly isn't. Not every game can be whittled down into a set of comparisons with others and conspiracies of copy-paste. But if we were doing that, then no, not much of that is actually here. However, that's also why I mentioned the lack of that jump. It's certainly doable and playable. A lot of things are doable and playable regardless, But there's a lot of backtracking that can happen because you'll find something cool looking and you start to head to it and realize, oh shit, I'm actually on this path that doesn't have a way up. So I have to go all the way back so that my character, Nimble Jax McButterfoot, can actually make it up the other side. It's especially infuriating when you end up going up a ladder and hitting a button to turbo speed your way up that ladder like you're some goddamn Looney Tunes character, but for some reason he can't bend his knees more than 1 inch to get a jump. I've seen better vertical leaps on dead bodies. Well, that's exploration and combat out of the way. I want to discuss the story without spoilers just for a second. The game's story is dire. You want to know how freaking dire this game is? This picture I found all burnt up is labeled Happy Family. Be prepared. And much of the game is about family. It's going to be delivered to you via the idea of searching for your own. But man, seeing so many shattered around you right from the start, it does an amazing job making you feel like it either matters more or sometimes you're lucky to just be alive. Many times games reflect a particular theme or a focus in the main character's plot, but it doesn't really reflect in the world itself. They remind you, but they don't reinforce it. They don't reinforce the good or the bad, where your story doesn't seem to match exactly what's going on. They remind you, but they don't reinforce it consistently. That's the opposite of Hell Is Us, for better or worse. When it's better, it's seeing those who have less than you or more than you torn from their grasp, but get back together by your actions, possibly. It's pretty damn incredible to join up a family because you ended up exploring around and finding something. This is also one of the first games I can say many of the side quests, the little tiny tangential quests, have an amazing feeling of reward to them. They're not necessarily this massive kind of lore. In fact, a lot of times you're doing very mundane things, stuff we've seen in other games. But this is a situation, and this is an overall worldview where the smallest things can matter. But I will say this, sometimes that's why the game's at its weakest. It's just the main search itself and your story. Not that it wasn't interesting, it's that I found myself more interested in everybody else in the game because ultimately I'm able to handle myself, generically at least, in the world. Many can't. Your mileage is going to vary on that. Now, I did have a couple of other issues. There were a couple quests that were quite difficult to actually end up succeeding at, and I had to really think hard at these because many of them, they really don't have a ton of information. There were also a couple times in the main story I got a little stymied by no clues or no real clues about what to do next. But once I ended up going back in the inventory, reading some of the documentations, and the game's really cool sort of clue system, I ended up figuring it out. Also, no real bugs to speak of. Had a couple glitches when it came to movement. Now, movement's a part of graphics. It's a bit of depression mixed with some gorgeous scenery. It has incredible moments too. Brilliance hidden within spots that you wouldn't expect. Coming down a tight, muddy road and around a corner, a massive open field unfolds around you, and you're met with a mix of war-torn towns, guards stand and watch, other places ripped apart, and then demons. Yeah, and a giant scary-ass orb of whipping energy and metal right in the middle of all this normal. And sitting down and talking to a guard, the graphics are excellent on a lot of these characters, discussing what they've done, what's ground them down, and sort of see them honestly realize that magic isn't that impressive when you're this war-torn. And the look on everybody, some of the characters you see, it's just awesome. And almost every single location had some kind of feeling like that, or some hidden character that you found, or some mysterious thing off in the distance. The world view and the way they put it together does a great job always offering you at least one place to go. Within the graphic settings, there's a ton of different discrete layers, shadows, lighting, texture, distance, all that, as well as DLSS frame gen, upscaling, Intel's version of upscaling, and AMD's as well. On a 4090 7800 X3D, the game with all the settings maxed was well over 100 FPS at 4K. That was having all the upscaling off. Now, it wasn't always at 100 with some drops in particularly massive sprawling viewpoints or walkouts. That sometimes would drop, but overall, anywhere from 70 to 110 was what I was getting. And the curve down all the way to the 2080 was exactly as expected. When it comes to the performance, not a ton of complaints. Some stutter here or there, but not as much as I would have expected. And there was a level of nuance to a lot of the graphic settings that you were able to adjust to really dial it in for you. This thing just captured my attention, and it captured my attention in an old style way, which I absolutely appreciate.
tower is haunted and cursed. I know it sounds silly, but it happens to be true.
I asked for a transfer to the UN peacekeepers, who had deployed inside ADIA. It backfired. When the paperwork cleared, ADIA's civil war was in full swing and the peacekeepers pulled out. I reported to my new unit, stole some gear, and crossed the mountains.
And another thing I appreciate is the audio. I got to say, it's very rare I'm impressed super early, but the voice work's awesome. Of course, you got Adam Jensen's voice actor, but there are also just different characters around the game that you end up talking to. There's that weird fat-chinned freak of nature-looking character that's a mix of Jabba the Hutt and some kind of outlaw Josie Wales that was amazing from the very moment you saw them. It's not only the design, though, it's usually the actual voices that go with them. And additionally, the succinct but always a little bit detailed writing of all the characters that continue to push you along. But excellent voice work and really good writing helped. Even if the main story, not as much. When it comes to helping, though, the music, man, this is melancholy, it's atmospheric, and altogether riskier than I expected. The music in Hell Is Us is some of the best I've heard all year long. Now, let me back this up for a second and explain why that is, because a little bit of Dying Light 2 sort of creeped in here, where the music isn't necessarily discrete tracks that are easy enough to parse. It's experimental. It means that almost no time while you're playing Hell Is Us do you feel as if you sort of expect to know what the music is going to do. Case in point, while walking down into the field and seeing a couple demons, this crunchy, eerie mixture of synths started to build as I moved down. Synths that turned almost into the expected arrangement you would assume would be in possibly the more cataclysmic, dire parts of, say, a Final Fantasy. However, at almost no time does the soundtrack ever use the instruments that you would expect in those particular points. It's discordant, and it reminds you of a lot of cosmic horror movies in that way. That is in front of you at any time, but it's also around you in that blanket of audio. Very good. It's not something you would pull out or play with your three friends headed to a wedding. It's incredibly hard for me to come up with any real negatives to the soundtrack, though. It is different. It may not be for you, but it absolutely added to the atmosphere for me. And the same can really be said for most of the audio effects. The game brings them front and center because a lot of overall quests and ideas of what you need to do and just little bits of mystery within the game are presented via that audio. Attacks, defenses, and enemy sounds are all good enough, with, I would say, the enemy sounds crawling a little bit above the rest to give you that feeling of otherworldliness. Worked quite well. And that all brings us to the fun factor. I'm going to tell you, it's weird. You're fighting a weird ghost that looks like it was attacked by a demonic self-aware Rubik's Cube that had also been, instead of self-solving, it was cosplaying some of the weird creatures that are in Remedy's control. And then once you're done killing it, you go back to town and tell the POS bad guy, who's the good guy, because they're not as bad as the worst guys, that you did him a solid. That's not always necessarily fun, but it is immersive. Though it does get a bit easy, be aware that you can jump in and adjust that difficulty at any time in real time, which you probably should as you get more and more skilled and you understand the enemies and your weapons and their powers. Interesting, immersive, and something that I absolutely enjoyed exploring and understanding, even if the main story wasn't as interesting as I thought it was going to be, at least until later on. And then, you know, the ending, well, that'll be up to you. Let's discuss the rating. Also, remember to subscribe, thumb this up. Got a bunch of videos, 2 more previews, 3 reviews coming out the rest of this month. Also, some thinky videos, as I like to call them, some sort of discussion videos that I'm going to be doing. So when it comes to the rating, again, in no way, shape, or form is Hell Is Us an amazing game, but it damned well is a very interesting one that I liked playing. And it reminded me of many of the games I enjoy that are AA or B. So for me, it's a buy. You may not like that it takes a while for you to get some of the abilities. It just depends on your understanding of the puzzles and how they work out. But that exploration and that feeling of difference is consistently here. For those who like to explore or have played a game like Gothic 3 and walked over a hill and there's some weird giant magical thing over the top of a city, or who went around some location in Elix only to see a giant valley and the indication of machinations most foul and thought-worthy, and you thought to yourself, I need to go there, this is probably going to speak to you. Absolutely unique title. Really enjoyed playing it. Anyway, check out the channel. Peace out. Oh, and the Patreon. It helps hugely, especially as AI summaries are causing people to just not even watch videos. If you jump in, hopefully I've saved you some cash and you feel like it's worthwhile.